Get me that signal. We need more power.
Welcome to another Voice of E board game review. I'm your host, Elliot Miller, and today I'm looking at the DC Comics deck building game from Cryptozoic Entertainment. It's a game for 2 to 5 players ages 15 and up, which seems a bit extreme to me. There isn't anything that complicated about it. It isn't gory, and there's not a bunch of TNA in it, so any 12-year-old could learn to play. On the back of the box, it describes the game as, in the DC Comics deck building game, you take on the role of Batman, Superman, or one of their brave and heroic allies in the struggle against the forces of supervillainy. While you begin armed with only the basic combat maneuvers, you will add new, more powerful cards to your deck as you go, with the goal of defeating as many DC Comics supervillains as you can. In the end, the player who has accumulated the most victory points from the cards in his or her deck wins the game. Well, that's from the back of the box. Let's take a look inside and see what they're talking about. The DC Comics deck building game comes with 214 cards, which split up nicely into the labeled slots in the box here. There are 7 oversized superhero cards, which actually are a pain to get out of the box. You gotta kind of pry them out of there. Each of the superheroes comes with their own special power. For example, Wonder Woman. For each villain you buy or gain during your turn, draw an extra card at the end of your turn. This is similar to the avatars in Thunderstone Advanced. There is a pretty good rulebook. It's a nice touch because it looks like a comic book. See, the rules for the game are really very simple. So why don't I explain the different cards as I show you how simple it is to set the game up. There is no board for the game, unlike its Marvel counterpart, so you set up the stacks right on the table. The main deck is the largest deck, and it consists of superhero, villain, location, equipment, and regular hero cards. Not superhero. Villain, superpower, location, equipment, and hero cards. It's basically everything except for the other cards that are actually labeled. You shuffle these up and place them on the table, and then flip over 5 cards, as I have done here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what forms your initial lineup, and this is where you'll be buying your cards from during the game. Next to these, you'll place the stack of kick cards and weakness cards. These are in their own little labeled slots in the box. Kick cards are cheap, generic cards that will give you +2 power when you draw them, and they cost 3 power to purchase. Weakness cards kind of clutter up your deck. You'll gain these in various ways, and if you notice, it's worth -1 victory point. Victory points are down here in the corner. Cost, victory points. The supervillain stack comes next. The game comes with 12 supervillains, and you'll randomly choose 7 of these, plus Ra's al Ghul. He always starts the scariness, so he always is going to be part of it, and then you shuffle up the other 11 and pick 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those, put him on top, and pow, there's your stack of supervillains. Once you beat all 8 of the supervillains, the game is over, and the player with the most victory points in their deck wins the game. The game also ends if the main deck ever runs out of cards, but I haven't had that happen yet. Each player randomly chooses an oversized superhero card. Randomly, let's see. Now there's actually 7 of these, so I just happen to have Superman and Wonder Woman here. Okay. And you'll get to use that hero's ability during the game. Then all the players get a starting deck of cards consisting of 7 punch cards and 3 vulnerability cards. So, the punch cards are your generic cards that have 1 power. You start with 7 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. and 3 vulnerability cards, which basically do nothing but take up space so that you don't have 10 cards that have +1 power. So you get 3 of those. That's your starting deck. That's every player's starting deck. You shuffle those up, and you're ready to go. To start, a player draws 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You add up the power that you have. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey, I didn't get any vulnerability cards. So I have 5 power. So what can I do? Well, if I had 8 power, I could defeat Ra-Ghul. But I don't have 8 power. I gotta wait for later. I could purchase any one or more of the cards here. For example, there's no good combinations, but I have 5, so I could buy the Fortress of Solitude. That's a location card. Once you buy it and you play it, it stays in front of you the entire game, and you get that benefit the whole time. There's not a lot of location cards in the game. There's only a couple. There just happens to be 2 out right now. For example, the Fortress of Solitude. When you play your first superpower on each of your turns, draw a card. Or you could fight against Harlequin. She only costs 2 to beat. So, this is what it costs to beat or basically buy that card. How much it costs in power. Down here is how much victory points it will add to your deck. This is what we will do for you. She will give you +1 power, and she has an attack. Each foe puts a punch or vulnerability from his discard pile on top of his deck. So you'll notice that a lot of the cards that you pick up have these either attacks or special abilities, and these take effect. An attack basically happens against all of your opponents. If they have a defense, then they can prevent it. For example, Bane. He costs 4 and will give you also 1 victory point, but he gives +2 power. And when you attack with him, each foe chooses and discards a card, which can be pretty painful because you only get 5 cards to start. Now, Bulletproof, this is a superpower, and this will give you +2 power in your deck. It costs 4, and this is a defense card, which you can use to prevent an attack. If you do, you draw a card, and you may destroy a card in your discard pile, which could come in handy if you want to get rid of weaknesses. A lot of the cards provide greater amounts of power to make it easier for you to defeat the supervillain cards, which they all take from 8 to 12 power each to defeat. Once defeated, they also go into your deck, into your discard pile, and they have their own benefits that they'll provide when they're drawn later in the game. They're also worth the most victory points, like Ra-Ghul is worth 4. As I said, many of the cards have special abilities that allow you to draw additional cards, or destroy cards, or attack your opponents and force them to discard, or gain a weakness. Some cards have defensive abilities which can ward off attacks from other players. Some cards combine with other cards to give huge power bonuses, or additional cards. Near the end of the game, it's not uncommon to end up playing 12 cards on your turn, and having 20 or more power to spend. It does slow each player down, but it speeds the game up as well because you start beating the supervillains quite easily. And that's really all there is to it. You play your cards, you follow the instructions on them, you buy cards, you flip up cards to replace the ones bought for the next player. So if I bought this and this and this at the end of my turn, I would flip over 3 more cards. 1, 2, 3. And then you end your turn. Once all the supervillains have been defeated, the game is over. It's easy to try to compare the DC game with Legendary, the Marvel deck building game, but they're actually quite different from each other. The DC deck building game actually reminds me more of Dominion than it does of Legendary. It has a lot of good points. It's vastly easier to set up than most deck building games, as there's no need for randomizers or 20 different stacks of cards to deal with. 2 minutes and you're ready to play a game. And it really doesn't take up as much space as most DBGs. It's really a very simple deck building game to learn. It organizes nicely in the box, the rule book is well done, and it was fun to play. If you're a DC Comics fan, you should have a good time playing the DC deck building game. On the negative side, it isn't as thematic as its Marvel cousin. I think it would have been nice if the superheroes each had their own decks of 10 starting cards, instead of just, 7 punch cards and 3 vulnerability cards. It would have added a lot more flavor to the game. In DC, you don't really feel like you're defeating the supervillains. It's more like you're just buying them off. Hey, here's $20. Go mess up Metropolis instead. Some of the card interactions can get a bit tricky as well. I wasn't kidding when I said that you could end up playing up to 12 cards on your turn. You might buy every card on the table and still have some power left over. It takes a bit of skill to calculate all of this out and play your cards in the right sequence to gain the most benefit. So the turns do get longer as the game goes on, as players figure out the best way to play their available cards. Once the game is over, you have to add up all of the victory points in your deck, and some are conditional victory points. For example, one card says, gain 5 victory points if you have 5 of these type of cards in your deck, and you'll need to figure out if you do or don't. It will take you a couple of minutes to sort out who actually won the game. There's also no real way to play the solo game, which is disappointing. You can try to play solo to see how many victory points you can earn before the game is over, but that's kind of boring. I would have liked some kind of solitaire way to play. Overall, I liked the DC Comics deck building game. Although you would think they'd been able to come up with some kind of better title, a DC Comics deck building game. I guess I'll be waiting for a Fortress of Solitude expansion with rules for solo play. Hint, hint. If you like a simple game to set up and learn with a DC superhero theme, then you should have a really good time with this game. If you've grown accustomed to the more complex and deeply themed deck building games, then maybe this one isn't for you. Thanks for joining me for this review of the DC Comics deck building game. Let me know if you found this review helpful by leaving a comment or sending me an email at Elliot_Miller@voiceofe.com. Make sure to subscribe to the Voice of E channel on YouTube, as I'll have plenty of gaming, entertainment, and comic book coverage this year. And it should be a lot of fun. Thanks again, and until next time, keep your mind free.